It is my pleasure to meet representatives of Korean companies who participate in today's online seminar. I would very much like to meet you in person and organize an on-site seminar to seek possible solutions to your questions or troubles. However, it is inevitable to hold our seminar online due to the COVID-19. I hope you understand this challenging situation. Today's seminar has a format of Q&A, consisted with several important questions on investment, tax, labor, and visa confronted when doing business in Brazil, and some advices to those issues. I think many companies face more complicated problems on site. I hope today's seminar can serve as a guide for the companies to seek solutions, although it cannot be a cure-all for all the problems. Two prominent law firms and one consulting firm will answer the questions on the four themes, which some of you raised or seem to be relevant in doing business in Brazil. I would like to extend my appreciation to the Tozzini, Freire, the Demarest, and the HSK. Today's online seminar will be of help not only to Korean companies in Brazil, but also to those who want to knock the attractive market of Brazil. After finalizing the pension reform last year, Brazil is now driving tax reform and administrative reform. In addition, when Brazil joins the OECD in the near future, I believe the so-called Brazil cost will also be significantly reduced. The negotiation for concluding a trade agreement between the Republic of Korea and Mercosur is in process. It is delayed for a while due to the COVID-19. However, when it is concluded, it will be an epoch-making momentum for the trade between Korea and Brazil. I hope to see Korean companies doing outstanding performance in Brazil, the land of opportunity, and thereby contributing to strengthening the bilateral relations between Korea and Brazil. The Embassy of the Republic of Korea in Brazil will do its best efforts to support you. Thank you.
My name is Douglas, and I am a partner in the tax practice at Demarest. I have been working here for more than 17 years. Demarest was founded in 1948 and is considered one of the most renowned full-service law firms in Brazil and largest in Latin America. Our history spans more than 70 years and is marked by the commitment for providing legal services with the highest standards of excellence and quality. Our legal team has approximately 350 lawyers and spreads and our offices in the cities of São Paulo, Rio, Brasilia, and New York. These professionals provide legal advisory, both domestic and international transactions, for more than 2,000 clients from all continents. Well, firstly, in order to answer these questions, we have to understand that the tax system in Brazil is very complex and has a lot of obstacles. And this program was created during a very confusing contest in Brazil. This program was called Inovar Auto and was a kind of program which granted some kind of benefits to companies or manufacturing automotive companies in Brazil. And really, and it's real that this benefit was not was granted by the law. However, it was not paid by the tax government, and it was a benefit granted by the federal government. And the problem is the Inovar Auto was a program created in order to protect the domestic companies, domestic industries in Brazil, and it was considered illegal by the WTO. But it is not enough to explain this. In order to explain this, we have to understand that Brazil granted this don't pay, and in the end of this program in 2017, another program was created in 2018. And this new program didn't address the problem regarding this payment. And in the last year of the government in the last year of the President Temer, a bill was sent to the Parliament in order to approve and give an answer for this question. However, from this time, we haven't an answer for this question. And how to address this? The federal government has to solve this problem in order to pay these companies, because it's a matter of confidence. And of course, companies, industrial companies or international companies will not come back to Brazil or will not invest in Brazil. We are reading some news in order we are reading news explaining that some investments will be cancelled unless Brazil paid this. So we have to solve this. Clearly, as a lawyer, I have to admit that it's possible to take this discussion to the courts. However, I don't know if it's good to the companies or to solve this with the federal government. This question is a little difficult to answer because, as you know, Brazil is a federation. We have 3 different levels of taxation in Brazil: federal, states, and municipal. We mentioned in your question a federal benefit. Among the federal legislation, we have some kind of benefits, and it's possible to explore this. But in addition, it's possible to use state and municipal. So I cannot say to you that there is a specific or direct answer for this. It's necessary to understand the context of the company and the context for in terms of investment. So if I can give an advice, or it's necessary to understand the federal benefits. We have some kind of benefits for culture, like Lei Rouanet, which is called, the law is Lei Rouanet, and it's necessary to understand here in the last years there was some discussion about Lei Rouanet, if it was correct or not. However, there are a lot of kind of benefits in the states for companies to invest money and pay taxes with this investment, and the same in the municipal. For example, the city of São Paulo has a very strong project in order to give the opportunity to the company to invest money and offset against taxes. So it's necessary to understand the context. But in terms of investment, I believe that there is a vast possibilities, a vast number of possibilities to address this investment.
My name is Andoni Hernandez. I'm one of the partners in the corporate area of Demarest, a Brazilian law firm, and I'm dealing with foreign investment in Brazil. Well, first of all, my recommendation will be to contact a reputed and solid law firm, which is experienced in dealing with foreign investment in Brazil. Secondly, it's always good to explore if there is any available official chamber of commerce, which is typically very used also to provide the initial and preliminary information about the country and help you familiarize with the topics that will be most relevant for planning that investment. Thirdly, and also relevant, is good to explore whether the origin countries of that investment may have local agencies to help. For example, in the case of Korea, we have the KOTRA, or in the case of Japan, we have the JOTRA, and I'm Spanish, so in the case of Spanish investments, we have the IFEX, which is the commercial arm of the embassy. And then third, and also important, you should check whether or not there are local agencies that will help you with investment. Depending on the size of the investment, it's always good to contact the local authorities in order to explore potential benefits or of making the investment in certain region or any other, and taking advantage and benefiting of whatever programs, investment promotion programs. In Sao Paulo, we've got Invest in Sao Paulo, Invest SP, which is the public authority, public entity, and governmental agency that deals with foreign investment in Brazil. Well, if I had to reply to that, I would have the magical ball, okay? Yes, FX risk is something that has been in the agenda of the government also as a concern, and all the investors. In the latest period, we have seen a big fluctuation of the real against other currencies. But, there are certain traditional methods to try to get protection against that. Those are the hedging, hiring hedging, financial hedging, to try to cope with the risk. I would say the second recommendation will be to try always to link the finance of whatever project you're looking at with the same currency of the income of that same project. So if you're going to invest and you're in a project in Brazil, and your expected income and business is going to be in Brazilian reais, probably the best way to protect yourself is to try to structure your capital needs and funding in the same currency, in reais, locally probably. Going to other specific measures, we've seen a concern also and some sensitivity from the government in order for bigger projects to try to give some protection and comfort to foreign investors. We've seen in the latest public bids, how the government has introduced certain elements, such as buffers or flexibility in certain payments that have to be done to the government for privatizations, where the government will take a hit or will just cushion down some of the fluctuation, for example. So there's an active concern from the government on that side, and they are trying to provide certain tools in order to mitigate or reduce that risk. That's how we are making progress and trying to keep the appeal for the investment in Brazil in big projects. I think this government is trying to give a more business-friendly face and approach to foreign investment. They have been through the Minister of Economy, Paulo Guedes, trying to listen to the market and investors, trying to converge into more international standards and practices business-wise. And I would say that they acknowledge that one of the big problems in Brazil is bureaucracy and red tape. So they have been trying to reduce what is called the Brazilian cost. Mainly, I would say, I would highlight two recent developments that helped that. One was the passing of the Economy Freedom Bill, which was one of the first actions by this government, which tries exactly to tackle the red tape and bureaucracy by reducing the time required to incorporate the company, the bureaucratic requirements to start a business, and to reduce the dependency on public officials in order to start business and carry on your business, in general terms. One other big step in that direction was an achievement by the previous government, by Temer, which was the reform of the labor legal framework. Okay, that has also helped to tackle one of the biggest concerns always that you talk about Brazil, which was labor costs, and not really direct labor costs, but the indirect labor costs related to claims and protection of certain industry, legal industry that was also construed around claims, labor claims. Also, I think it's worthy talking about two other initiatives that are really helping the scenario. One is the promotion of the privatizations and all public contracts with opportunities in the electric sector, in the power sector, with opportunities also with city lighting and other public contracts and opportunities that are being promoted or boosted by the economy minister. And then there's also an interesting movement in modernizing and adapting the banking sector regulations to allow and attract more fintechs and new techs into the Brazilian business environment.
Hello everybody, my name is Renato Canizares. I'm one of the partners of the labor department here at Demarest Advogados in Brazil. We have a very big and strong labor department here at the firm. We have around 35 lawyers and we help our clients in all matters regarding labor and employment in Brazil, going from companies that are establishing their subsidiaries in Brazil, so preparing policies, agreements, and internal procedures, up to litigation at the labor courts and the Supreme Court in Brazil. Okay, well, there is a very important point for us to take into consideration when we talk about the labor reform we had in 2017. The labor reform was destined to address several issues that used to generate controversies in the Brazilian labor courts. So just for you to have an idea, our labor code is from 1943 and it has almost 1,000 articles. In fact, Brazil is a very regulated jurisdiction. So we have the labor code, we have the constitution, we have employment agreements, we have collective agreements, we have internal policies and federal laws regarding labor aspects. And specifically talking about the labor reform, we changed our labor code. So I was saying the labor code has 1,000 articles. From 1943 until now, they had changed around 400 articles. And only in 2017, they changed 100 articles. Okay, so it was a huge change. And it was basically destined to address these issues to help companies to have a more business-friendly environment. Okay, so of course, as we're talking about so many changes, we would need a long time to talk about all of them. But if I could address the main changes, I would first address the change that says that whatever is negotiated with the union regarding certain topics will prevail upon law. Okay, so and these topics comprise mainly working schedule, health hazardous allowances, profit sharing and variable payments, titles and jobs policies. So whatever you negotiate with the union will prevail upon law. So that's a very important change that we had here, because with this you may address, as I said, certain subjects that are controversial. Another very important aspect comprises, and what is being discussed a lot in this pandemic days, comprises the home office and telecommuting work. So we didn't have a rule about that in the past, but as from 2017, the labor code brought some rules regarding the home office work. So mainly stating that these employees may be exempt from working hours control and exempt from overtime payment, that the company has to agree with the employee and pay for the expenses for them to work from home. Okay, and a very important topic, which is that whenever they work from home, it's an extension from the work environment. So consequently, you need to have a work environment that is fit for work in what concerns health and safety. Another very important point comprises working schedules, because, you know, whenever we had these issues regarding differentiated working schedules, quite often you had to negotiate it with the union. And these changes brought some situations in which you may have individual agreements held directly with the employees. Okay, so for instance, companies that want to implement an offsetting system under which the employee works overtime, but he doesn't get paid for that overtime. Instead of that, they get rest days. Okay, in the past, you had to agree that with the union. Now you may agree directly with the employee without the union participation, regarding, of course, that there isn't anything to the contrary in the collective bargaining agreement, okay, held with the union that is applicable to the entire industry. Okay. Another very important aspect that was brought by this labor reform comprises what we call the voluntary jurisdiction. Because what is important for businessmen to know in Brazil is that employees cannot waive labor rights. So whenever the company wanted to get a waiver from an employee that was leaving the company, it used to be very difficult, because they could only get this waiver in court. And we didn't have any tools to get that except waiting for the employee to sue the company and then reach a settlement. And this labor reform came with some new provisions to handle this situation. So according to the reform, the employees and companies, they may execute an out-of-court agreement and simply ratify it in court. And once the judge ratifies that, they get a full release from that employee. So that's very important, because quite often we see whenever executives leave the companies, they get some additional dismissal packages, but companies were always concerned because they didn't get a full release, and now they can get it. Okay, so that was a very relevant also change that was brought by the reform. Well, in fact, it is provided in pension law that we had in Brazil, that basically says that companies with more than 100 employees have to hire disabled employees from 2% to 5% of their workforce. Okay, so if you have from 100 to 200 employees, you have to hire 2%, from 201 to 500, 3%, 500 to 1,000 employees. 4% of your workforce must be of disabled employees. And if you have more than 1,000, as from 1,001 employees, you have to hire 5% of disabled employees. Okay, and you also have, this is for sure a law that was destined to seek the inclusion of disabled people in the work environment. Okay. What we have now in Brazil is that most of the companies, they try to follow that, because the inspections from the labor ministry, they are quite frequent on this subject. Okay, and you have to be careful also about the disability, because there are some parameters for the disabilities that will fulfill these quotas. Okay, so it's not any disability. So for instance, if the person has a visual disability, it has to be after a certain degree of disability, and hearing the same thing, and so on. Okay, but it's destined for all disabilities. Of course, that what we have in practice here is that sometimes companies have difficulties to fulfill the quotas. And then quite often when they suffer these inspections or are questioned by labor authorities, okay, if they don't fulfill the quotas, they have penalties that are applied to them. They go from around $500 to $50,000. Okay, that's the cap, the maximum of the penalty for this. Okay. So what we usually recommend our clients is that, well, first of all, try to fulfill this quota. And if you're not able to fulfill that, you have to show the authorities that you've taken all the efforts to fulfill this quota. Because with this, you may prove that, okay, I've tried to do my best, but because of a lack of qualified employees or lack of people in my region, I was not able to fulfill the quota. Okay. I believe that first of all, it's important to clarify this point on the labor courts. The issue is that it really depends on the internal practice of the company on whether it will be condemned or not. We know that in some cases the labor courts are protective, okay, but of course that it will always depend on the effective relationship that was held between the parties, okay. But anyway, as I said before, the labor reform already came to have a more business friendly environment. Okay, and just for you to have an idea, at the time that we had the labor reform, there is a specific rule that was brought by the labor reform that said that if an employee filed a lawsuit against the company and lost the lawsuit, the employee would have to pay the attorney's fees for the company's lawyer from 5 to 15% of what they lose in court. This was destined mainly to avoid those cases in which they use it to file lawsuits, knowing that they couldn't get anything, but they would try it anyway. Okay, so with that, we had a reduction of approximately 40% of the labor lawsuits that used it to be filed in our courts. So now things in the labor court and the number of labor lawsuits has been reduced a lot, and we know that whenever you have a lawsuit, they make a real deep previous analysis on whether they really have chances of success or not. So that was a very important change that we had, and it changed this environment that was somehow harmful for the companies. Okay. One important thing, of course, is that we have several projects in our Congress with bills of laws that handle labor and employment aspects. But one that has been discussed a lot is an improvement on the home office and telecommuting work. Okay, so an improvement on these rules, an improvement on the right of the employee of not being accessed by the company at certain times. Okay, so but of course it's very early to say anything because it's still being discussed and it has to go through all the phases in our Congress.
Right.
Well, to answer that, I believe it is important for me to explain how a few things work in Brazil. So first of all, what is important for companies to know, mainly whenever they are having a first experience in Brazil, is that there are companies representative associations in Brazil based on industry, okay, and they are based on state level, and they represent all the companies here in Brazil, mainly with the interaction with the workers' union. So we call these associations as a companies union also here. So these associations may be a first association that could, first entity that could help companies. There are also associations based on industry, so Commerce Association, Metal Industry Association. They are different from these ones that I've just mentioned that may also assist companies with whatever they want. And of course, law firms, accountants, and independent contractors that companies may look for to have a more direct and exclusive assistance here in Brazil. But I believe that it is important for companies to know that whenever we talk about labor and employment, okay, there are a few principles that it must abide by whenever they want to start business in Brazil. So first of all, and these are hot topics and very basic, but they will rule almost all the labor relationships, and they will always face these principles. So first of all, salaries cannot be reduced in Brazil. Okay, salaries can only be reduced with the union's assistance, and regarded that the company grants certain warranties for the employees, like a job protection for a certain period of time and so on. Second most important rule is that detrimental changes to the employee's employment conditions, they're considered null. So if you make a change in a certain condition of the remuneration or the work rendered by an employee that is detrimental in comparison with the previous conditions that the employee had, it's most likely that if the employee questions it in court, it will be considered null. And even if the employee doesn't question that, an authority may notice it in an inspection and may apply penalties and have the previous conditions reestablished. Okay. Another very important point is that employees in Brazil cannot waive labor rights. So they cannot renounce anything, and even if they do, it's not valid, may be questioned in court. That's why it's so important that rule we've talked about, the voluntary jurisdiction and how you may ratify an out-of-court agreement in court. Okay. Outsourcing is a very important point also. Okay, so we had very recent changes with the labor reform regarding outsourcing, because in the past there was a discussion that you could not outsource your main business, and after several discussions and several years discussing this issue, it was said that companies now can outsource any kind of work, but if the company treats the outsourced worker as an employee, it's most likely that an employment bond may be recognized among them. And even if it doesn't happen, the company that takes the service always has a secondary liability regarding outsourced workers. So if the outsourced company is not paying them correctly, the company that is hiring them is most likely held liable for any payments due. Okay. And last one is that everybody is unionized in Brazil. So as from the moment you hire your employee, number one, there is most likely that there is a union that represents the employee in Brazil. Okay, because unions in Brazil, they are what we call external unions. They are industry based and they are set on state level or city level and sometimes national level. And so they are different from certain jurisdictions where the unions, they are created inside the company, you know. And everybody's unionized here, and consequently, there's always a collective agreement, or in most cases, there is a collective agreement that is applicable to your employees in Brazil. Okay, and these collective agreements, they are negotiated every year between the company's association that we've talked about and the workers' union, and it sets several rules that will be applicable to the employment agreements held in Brazil. So I believe that these are the main points to start knowing a little bit about labor and employment in Brazil.
Hi everyone, my name is Jerry Levers de Abreu. I am a tax partner at Tozzini Freire Advogados, a Brazilian full-service law firm. Today we'll be exploring a little bit of the Brazilian tax system, a tax system that is known to be one of the most complex tax systems in the whole world. I guess that the best answer to that question is yes. Companies will be affected and will most likely have their tax benefits reduced. All the proposals under discussion with the Brazilian Congress, they provide for the elimination of tax-related incentives with respect to state VAT, what we call ICMS. But we have to make a distinction here. There are tax incentives here in Brazil that they depend on commitments assumed and made by the companies with the relevant state that is granting the tax incentives. For instance, companies may be required to make certain investments to generate job posts and etc. In those cases, the tax reform proposals, they could not affect the enjoyment of the ICMS tax benefits because there is a protection here in the Brazilian tax system for the taxpayers that cannot have their tax benefits revoked when they are granted under certain conditions and commitments. Other category of tax incentives, that is, those tax incentives that do not actually depend on commitments made by the companies, those ones can be freely revoked or changed by subsequent legislation. So it's important for the companies to analyze whether the tax incentives that they're enjoying, they have commitments or not. Because in the first case, the companies have a protection and they may be able to enjoy the tax incentives until the end of the term for which they were granted. In the other cases, when the company has not committed to make investments, generate job posts, and etc., those tax incentives can be freely revoked and therefore the companies may be affected right away. It's also important to comment here that we've seen some movements by the states with respect to the reduction of tax incentives. Recently, the state of São Paulo enacted a law giving the power to the executive power to revoke tax incentives by means of state decree, which is, although debatable, is provided by the new legislation. And we've seen other states, such as Goiás and Rio Grande do Sul, moving in the same direction. They are reviewing their tax legislation that grants tax benefits, and it is expected for the companies to have some kind of an effect in their business here in Brazil. Well, in my opinion, no. I think that the government is struggling to face the expenses related to the COVID-19 sanitary and financial crisis. So I would not expect a tax reduction to be implemented in the near future. Despite of that, I think it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of proposals being discussed in the Brazilian Congress with respect to tax amnesties, because we know that many of the Brazilian companies, they have been facing difficulties in paying their taxes, and the government is evaluating the creation of some kind of tax amnesties programs. One important point here is that in Brazil, tax amnesties program, usually they do not provide for a reduction in the principal amount. What we can expect is a reduction in the penalty and interest for companies that somehow failed to pay their taxes, but we would not expect a reduction in the principal amount. One last point I think it's important to comment is that the Brazilian government is evaluating to reduce the corporate income tax rate to around 20%. So current rate is of 34%, and they are analyzing to reduce it to around 20%. Although this seems to be good news, we do not expect that reduction to be implemented without the taxation of dividends. Because currently here in Brazil, we have a tax exemption applied to dividends distribution. And what is being evaluated by the Brazilian government is to reduce the corporate income tax rate to around 20%, as I said, and to apply a taxation over dividends. It's not clear what would that taxation be, but there are discussions around a 15% rate over the distribution of dividends. It is not clear whether it would work as a withholding tax that would be offset against the tax due by the recipient of those dividends. In any case, if you add 15% expected rate over dividends distribution to 20% expected tax rate deriving from the reduction, you reach 35%, which is a little higher than the current rate applicable to the companies. As a final note, just for you to have an idea, the financial aid granted by the Brazilian government to the Brazilian population, and I'm talking about the 600 Brazilian reais, has cost the Brazilian government more than 10 billion Brazilian reais. So I would expect the government to seek for new sources of revenues rather than implementing a tax reduction. A distinction, though, is necessary here to proper answer this question. There are two possible ways a company may accumulate as ICMS tax credits. The first one, what we call a positive balance of ICMS credits, derive from high levels of stock, for instance. The company purchases a lot of inputs and merchandise to be resold, and those merchandise are still in the company's stock. So in that case, what we have is ICMS positive balance. We have credits, but it's not actually what we call accumulated ICMS tax credits. Accumulated ICMS credits is defined by the legislation as those credits arising from different rates applicable to entries in the company and exits of the company. So, for instance, when a company acquires a given input that is to be used in the manufacturing process of a product to be sold, the company is entitled to register an ICMS credit that is shown in the tax invoice for the acquisition. And let us suppose that in that given transaction, the ICMS due is of 18%. So in the entry in the company, the ICMS credit is 18%. And the company, let us assume that the company manufactures a product that is subject to a 12% ICMS rate. So there is a difference between the rate of the entry and the rate of transaction to be carried out by the company. In that case, we have what we call ICMS accumulated credit. For this type of credits, that is the ICMS accumulated credits deriving, for instance, from the difference in the tax rates, there are some options for the company to make use of those credits. In the state of São Paulo, for instance, the company may transfer that accumulated balance to third parties. Of course, it's not a simple operation. The company must obtain approval from the state tax administration, but of course, it's something that it's possible and we see happening in companies. We, for instance, advise some clients doing so. Other option is to pay tax debts of third parties. And the company may enter into a system here in the state of São Paulo, what is called ECREDAC, and the company transferring the credits may use those credits to pay debts of third parties. Of course, this is a transaction, as I said, that must be approved by the state tax administration, but it's possible. I think it's also worth mentioning that there are some mechanisms here in the state legislation that enable the companies to avoid the accumulation of tax credits. One possible example is a special tax regime for the deferral of the ICMS due upon the acquisition of inputs, for instance. We have assisted many companies here in Brazil in obtaining that kind of special tax regime. So the companies may work in two possible ways. Whenever the company has this accumulated ICMS tax credit, it may evaluate the possibility of obtaining the approval from the state tax administration to transfer that amount to third parties, or the company may evaluate ways to avoid the accumulation of those tax credits. Differently from other parts of the world, Brazil does not have what we call a tax ruling system, in which a company may approach the tax administration and enter into agreements to avoid or to resolve tax issues that arise. Brazil, though, has some mechanisms available to the taxpayers that may present, for instance, requests to the tax administration for tax opinion. So this means that a company here in Brazil may file with the tax administration a request for opinion and receive from that tax administration a response that will guide the taxpayer to comply with its tax obligations. The issue that arises here is that usually this takes a year or so, in some cases more than 1 year. So this mechanism is used by the companies, but they tend to avoid it because it takes very long for the obtention of a response. So what the companies here in Brazil usually do is that they resort on tax consultants or law firms to guide management decisions, because we don't have a mechanism here whereby you can approach the tax administration and try to resolve the problem before the problem even happens. There are some exceptions to that rule. Companies that make investments here in Brazil, in some cases they may enter into agreements with the tax administration, and they may count with the assistance of the investment agencies here in Brazil. Of course, in certain situations, companies may resort on the state development agencies, especially in the interaction with the state tax administration. One last point, a tax issue arises, for instance, the company receives a tax assessment. The company may dispute that tax assessment in the administrative sphere. And the administrative sphere is important for the company to consider in disputing a tax assessment because it does not require a guarantee from the taxpayer to dispute the tax assessment. So the company may defend itself without presenting a guarantee. And during the administrative phase, the enforceability of the tax debt is suspended. So the company is not going to be harmed or have its assets harmed because the enforceability of the tax debt is suspended during the administrative phase. On the other hand, if the company opts to dispute the tax assessment in the judicial courts, a guarantee must be presented. So this is why we always advise our clients to consider disputing the tax assessment in the administrative sphere and, of course, to avoid the need to present a guarantee.
Hello, my name is Alberto Shin, and I'm a lawyer, and I have been practicing law for almost 10 years now. I'm a partner at Hussein Kaesi, and our company was founded in 2001, and we this month completed 19 years of existence. Our company is focused in providing solutions in global mobility, which include immigration, tax, and relocation for natural persons and companies in Brazil. First of all, it's important to mention that it's very difficult to anticipate any best possible solution to a crisis such as COVID-19, since this pandemic not only affected Brazil, but the entire world. As a general orientation, we always advise our clients to provide us with the necessary information and documents related to the visa process as soon as they have it, since the entire visa procedure is concluded and filed through an online system of the Ministry of Justice. Therefore, the fact that no paperwork is needed tends to speed up the process considerably. Also, in cases in where the visa must be collected in a Brazilian consulate abroad, we always direct our clients to countries that are historically more open and flexible with immigration matters. Lastly, the new immigration law of 2017 provided us with the possibility of concluding the entire visa process in Brazil. This means that a trip abroad to a Brazilian consulate is no longer necessary. However, the initial duration of this visa is granted for a period of 1 year for all types of visas. Therefore, whenever this period is done, a renewal process must be concluded. There are two general types of residence authorizations, also known as visas, that are issued by the Ministry of Justice for foreigners. The first one is the residence authorization granted for an indefinite period. The second one is the residence authorization that is granted for a determined period. The most common visas that are granted for an indefinite period are 1. For legal representatives of a Brazilian entity in the quality of officers, and 2. Natural persons that are investing in Brazil. The initial term of duration of these visas is for an indefinite period, which means that there is no expiration date. Under the category of visas granted for a determined period, we have 3 most common cases. The first one is employees with a valid work contract with a Brazilian entity. The second one is technicians, and the third one is for trainees. The initial duration of these visas vary from 1 to 2 years. All residence authorizations or visas are concluded and approved by the Ministry of Justice through their online system. The entire procedure takes up to 30 days to be analyzed and approved, and this deadline is for all types of visa requests. Regarding the costs, the filing of the process before the Ministry of Justice has a governmental fee of approximately 180 reais. Once this first step is concluded, a second step at the Federal Police is necessary. The steps at the Federal Police involve the registration of the foreigner and the obtaining of his ID card, which is called the RNM. The governmental fees involved in this step before the Federal Police is of approximately 400 reais. In Brazil, we have 2 major public entities that are responsible for immigration matters. The first one is the Ministry of Justice, which is responsible for analyzing and approving all visa procedures in Brazil. The second one is the Federal Police, which is responsible for the border control in national territory. This means that all entry and exit of people in Brazil is overviewed by the Federal Police. Both public entities have their own channel of communication by telephone and email. Therefore, any person can access them directly without the need of having someone in between to coordinate the communication. Lastly, please note that there is no private entity authorized in Brazil to provide any formal information and communicate with any interested person in behalf of the Ministry of Justice and the Federal Police.